You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Welcome to TFM's local books and comic show for Star Trek, and I'm just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and I'm so excited that back with me is Casey Pettitt. Casey, how are you doing today?
I am doing great, except wondering where summer is here in the Northwest, because it has rained nonstop for the last, week. And it's great, because it cuts down on fires. But it sucks because we have no summer.
You know, I'm agreeing with you on that because I absolutely am enjoying the fact that we will hopefully not have forest fires.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm also with you in the sense that I am absolutely ready for summer at this point. And I grew up in Texas. I don't like the heat. I don't like the humidity type of thing. But yeah, it's time. Yeah. I mean, come on. Goodness.
What are we at mid-June
Please.
Here? And it's, yeah. And in Spokane, where I'm at in eastern Washington, it's the dry side of the state. And we're getting Seattle rains.
It's crazy. It's been crazy here too. So right there with you. But I'm excited to be here to talk some comics and finish up the Daedalus series, or duology, I guess, at this point. So... But you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're on Apple Podcasts or something like a Spotify where you can give us a star rating and review, we'd really appreciate it. Definitely helps people find the show. So, if it's like Apple Podcasts, we always read those reviews out on the show as well. So please do give us a star rating and review in those places. And just make sure you're subscribed. You'll get the show as soon as it drops, which is always the best place to be. So you'll never miss out on any content. Of course, you can also find us on Instagram and Twitter at TrekFM, or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. There's the listeners-only discussion group that you can join, where you can talk to listeners from all over the world about the different podcasts here. And, of course, we've got the website at Trek.fm, where you can find us and all of the shows that we're doing. And if you want to make sure that all of these podcasts keep coming to you, we would appreciate you supporting us over at patreon.com/TrekFM, like our wonderful associate producers here on Patreon and through Patreon, Casey Pettitt, as well as Greg Rosio, who make sure that, of course, Literary Treks keeps coming to you each and every week with their support, as well as the entire network. So it has definitely been a rough few years, so we definitely would appreciate anything that you could do. Again, that's patreon.com/TrekFM. So Casey, we haven't had any new Mirror War issues come out recently, but we have had another Adventures in the 32nd Century issue 4. And so I'm wondering, has this continued its trend of being a fun comic for you to read, or has it gone up or down? What was this issue like for you, sir?
So yes, this has continued to be enjoyable. This actually, I believe, is the last of this little run of comics here. And this one's about Linus, who's our favorite Saurian from Star Trek Discovery. And I'm going to just go out on a limb here and say this is my favorite of the 4 so far. This was just a fun.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. We get, so Linus, I think when he showed up on Discovery, was kind of a fan favorite just because he's kind of that weird alien. You know, he doesn't look like he's one of the non-human type characters that we've got. And So kind of anytime we can get more Linus is fun. And this was actually just kind of a on the more serious side, I guess, for Linus. We learn a little bit more of Saurian physiology, the fact that they've got 4 hearts and that they don't beat in sync until like it's kind of almost we come to find out basically that as they have important life events, that's when their hearts start coming more and more into sync. And that by itself is just kind of a fun insight, I guess, into this alien species. We've always heard of Saurians from the Saurian brandy that Kirk loves so much. But then to learn that, but then to have that like lead into him helping save the crew from whatever they're doing. Like that's something unique about himself, that he's actually able to contribute to the crew by essentially he has to put the whole crew in like a heart arrhythmia, which none of us wants to have happen, but ends up saving the crew, and it almost makes Linus feel more like the crew. But it was actually one of these stories that it had a I don't know, I was going to say real world, but a current time, like it had a tie-in to the current point in the series of Discovery, but then also, background on this character that I think everyone's come to love, but more so than like Grudge, the cat, or, the Detmer story even didn't have a huge impact, I felt like, on the greater Discovery story. And this one didn't have a huge impact on it, but it just felt like a better character development piece, I guess, as far as, like I said, bringing him into the crew than what we've even gotten on screen. So, yeah, I think, and the artwork in this one too is, I don't know if it's the same people that are doing the artwork each issue, but the colors were so much more vibrant. The likenesses were very good. They kind of have been all along, but especially I feel like in this one, they really got Saru and Linus and Burnham, especially. And yeah, I mean, just, I feel like pretty fantastic all the way around. So if I was going to rate this one, I would probably give it 5 out of 4 heartbeats in sync. Just because this is one that would, if this was the first issue, I'd be like, oh, I want to see more stories like this. And it figures that on their last issue, that's where they really hit their rhythm, I feel like, on these adventures in the 32nd century.
I mean, that's really cool, though, to me, that for you, you've been reading the series, you've been enjoying it, and, obviously there haven't been any issues with it. You haven't not liked it, but it's interesting to me that for you, you feel like that they did really find their best footing with the last issue, which is kind of great. I mean, at least, I think, in all honesty, you would much rather the series end strong. And so the fact that it was able to do so for you is awesome. So that, I mean, it sounds like in the end, this was a series that you were really glad that they, actually produced in the first place, which is great.
Yeah, and this is one, I think this issue, especially ending on this issue, what it makes me think is, I hope they do this for Strange New Worlds, where they do kind of one-shot character-focused issues on characters that we don't see much, like Hemmer, or I mean, really, I guess Hemmer's the only kind of main crew. I could see a Hemmer. I could see an Mbanga story working well in this. I think a number 1 or a Una story. I think that Strange New Worlds has actually got some great characters that would fit really well in this kind of one-shot adventures in the 23rd century or whatever.
Yeah.
I think they should go that route.
Like a Sam Kirk.
Sam Kirk, that'd be good.
Because we're always worried that he's going to get injured on episodes, honestly. So yeah, I think that would be actually really cool.
They're going to make us fall in love with Sam Kirk before the end of Strange New Worlds.
Probably.
Whether we see his demise or not.
Yeah, exactly. So no, I mean, I'm glad that it ended up, being a great comic for you in the end, and I don't know what more you could ask than the fact that, hey, it's a comic that you ended up really enjoying reading in the end. So that's fantastic, and hopefully then that will continue. I'll be interested, of course, when we finally get more Mir War issues. I know for both you and I, it has been somewhat disappointing. So be really interested to see what happens there. But before we do that, I don't know, maybe we should enjoy wrapping up this Enterprise duology and see how that comes to a close.
Let's do it.
Well, Casey, we are here at the end of Daedalus's Children. And so we are finishing the duology, as we mentioned, for this Enterprise series. And one of the things that I was really interested in, and honestly, we'll probably be jumping around a bunch today because we're wrapping up the story, but you asked, I felt like, a very interesting question on the outline. And in all honesty, it seemed like a great question to kind of, because now that we've gotten the final part of the story, I think it is a perfect question to kind of ask here at the beginning, which is the timeline question. Like you mentioned here, possibly, would this have been a better story set in a different part of the Enterprise timeline? And so what do you think? Do you think that would have been the case if this had been maybe season 4 somewhere, or if it had been like kind of a season 5 type story or somewhere else, or do you feel like it works here in this second season timeline?
Yeah, I think because where it's set is like right towards the tail end of season 2 of Enterprise, which I think with the story we got in the first book in Daedalus, I think that worked okay. But then we had the kind of to be continued aspect of it. And this, I keep wanting to call it an episode, but this, because the way it's written, it actually feels, it works really well, like it would be a good episode, or multiple episodes really, because the story is so big. And it was once we got into the story and realizing how big the story was, the fact that they're in an alternate time, or not a timeline, an alternate universe. They're, they've got to get the Enterprise back. They've got to figure out how to get home. They've got to get, like, there's just so many things happening. And we're like, they tell us it's been 3 or 4 weeks that they've been in this timeline. So we're talking a month. Mm-hmm. And to think that a month occurred between 2 episodes of a season that already has like 24 to 26 episodes. I mean, the timing doesn't work real well. And so like the more I thought about it as I was reading along and getting further and further into it, it just felt like a story that worked better once, like if I put it like in a season 5, like between, mm-hmm. The Terra Prime episodes and These Are the Voyages, because that one I think had like a 10-year jump in it. So like sometime in that time period, because that's kind of our new lost era of Enterprise. Really, it's that we had this timeline jump before These Are the Voyages by like 10 years, and we got and then the other books take place after that, after the events of that show. And so I felt like this would have actually fit really well, like, because it's kind of a bit of an epic story. Could have fit well either as a season 4 episode, since they had those shorter arcs, or again, like something in this unfortunately non-existent season 5, just because we knew our characters very well at that point. Sometimes the Archer here felt like the Archer from season 3 and a little bit in season 4, when he tells, I can't remember who he's talking about, but he says, if he tries anything, hurt him. If he says, if he doesn't feel well, if he apologizes, if he complains, like, hurt this guy that they've got in custody. And it felt more like the season 3. It didn't feel like the season 2 Archer, who was a little too not rule abiding, but a little bit goody, I guess, that really got his hands dirty in season 3.
I think that the fact that you brought the question up was something that it was one of those things where I couldn't pinpoint it reading the story, and then I saw that question and I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's the thing that I feel like maybe I felt like the first book didn't bring this question to mind for me at all. But there was something about this second book that I felt like absolutely did. And I couldn't put my finger on it completely. And I think you have just absolutely done so for me. And so thank you, because it was annoying the crud out of me. But I think that on top of the timeline question, which I think you just rightly nailed, to me that there was something about the style of the writing in this story that felt different than the first book. And it was language choices that especially people like Trip or Archer were using. It felt like there were too many colloquialisms that we use today, and which are basically shortcuts of being able to say something. Mm-hmm. But in a lot of ways, they're also, I would say, not something that you tend to see in published work of this caliber. And so I felt like, to me, it just didn't quite feel up to snuff in the writing style, I guess, that I'm used to for Star Trek books here. And that's also something to me that, along with the timeline issue, I think this is something else that also just kind of didn't seem to work for me as well as previous books.
Yeah, it's like it felt like the only reason those colloquialisms were in there was so that then Archer or Trip or somebody would have to explain what that meant. And at that point, you've now just wasted several lines of text explaining to the reader what the reader already knows to explain it to an alien who doesn't know. And that doesn't even matter. Yeah. And some of those things didn't even, I get it. Trip said a lot of that kind of stuff, especially early in the series, but not, I feel like, as much as these books really brought out in him. You know, it's kind of like, it's kind of like the overdone brogue sometimes in Scotty's, when they write for Scotty, or the accents that they do for Chekhov.
Yeah. And with Enterprise, I think those things happen more often, but I still just felt like it was just too much here in this story, and it started to drive me a little bit crazy in the book. So that was a little bit frustrating. But for you too, one of the big parts of the story that we talked about last time was obviously the idea that they were in an alternate universe. But we did learn, and we had the question of, is this the mirror universe? Is this not? We learned that this is not the mirror universe. And so how did you feel about that revelation and the way that it allowed then Stern to kind of create some very different frustrations for our characters, different things that are happening to them because of where we are, things that we're playing with then in this universe that you wouldn't be able to do if it was the mirror universe? How did that all end up working for you?
I'm very glad that it wasn't the mirror universe, just because we've had enough of that. But also because it just canonically, I know that they did it in Discovery, but if we can't just have every crew go to the mirror universe and then classify it. Which brings up the one issue that I've got about this taking place in any kind of alternate universe, whether it's in our universe with alternate people coming over or our people going into an alternate universe, which is what happened here, is that how are they going to explain this? Like, when the mirror universe shows up in the original series, it's kind of like this revelation that, parallel universes can exist. And so we've got this, a little bit of an issue here where, so how come it was such a surprise later? Like, how come they weren't exploring other universes? Why were they always going to the mirror universe?
Right.
That aside, I actually really liked, I liked the problem, I guess, that it posed for the crew as far as that they couldn't just warp off and go home. But also the fact that they physically had to get out of there, that their bodies essentially weren't compatible with this universe, with the food in it or with the proteins or whatever it was. And that I felt like made for an interesting take on it, especially when the revelations came out that some of the Enterprise crew were also getting sick, like Hoshi and Trip did, while they had been captured, but also some of the alternate universes people got sick when they ate food on the Enterprise. And so like it actually worked both ways. And so like that whole aspect to me actually worked pretty well, just because it seemed well thought out. And as far as like a quick universe building in really just one book, I mean, we started it in the last book, but we really got to explore this universe in this one. I thought it was good, very consistent as far as like how they worked with it, and the fact that I think Phlox was even was he using that to help Ferric get better? I can't remember if that played into it, but I think some of that, like the medicine that he had or the tests that he could do, were different from what their people were able to do. So it just, all of it worked very well, I feel like, for the story, and gave a good problem for the crew to try to figure out and fix.
Yeah. No, I mean, I really do agree with you on all of those points. I think this is one of those things where they really utilize this to the fullest potential. I think you were right in pointing out it is a little bit strange. Obviously, it does feel a little bit weird that, we go to this alternate universe and then, we've never been to any other alternate universe other than the mirror universe. So it seems kind of strange that they're there now. And so, but in the end, I feel like this was good because what it also was able to do is, characters like Duval, who we wondered about, well, then they weren't actually from our universe. They were from that universe. But I also liked that you didn't have to worry about any of the mirror universe conventions of their evil and all that stuff. It's just that they're different. They've had different experiences, like the fact that we learned that Duval and the Archer from this universe were actually a couple. And when the accident happened, she was pregnant with their son, which is who the first Sadir's quote-unquote son is. It's not actually his son. It's actually Jonathan Archer's from this universe. And so I loved the way that those things were able to work and those revelations were able to come about because of the fact that we weren't dealing with, them being in the alternate universe, basically. So, yeah, I thought that this ended up working out pretty well. And like the fact that, we made a lot of the fact that it was slightly annoying, I think, for us that, Hoshi was kind of out of it the whole time.
Yeah.
But then with the explanation, I think helped with that too. The fact that she was having, because everybody had different reactions, which I thought was really interesting, to the idea that the proteins in that universe aren't giving us what we need from our universe, and therefore it was causing her to be really sick. And so that all really, I thought, was fantastic as well, because it really did work. So I thought that they did a very good job of kind of bringing all of this together and making it make sense, which was great. But at the same time, it is one of those points where you're like, okay, but that still doesn't, I don't know, just doesn't quite fit. So.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, it's an extra story. It doesn't have to necessarily fit. We could headcanon our way into it, or like at some point we can just go, I don't know, it's fine. It was sure a good story otherwise.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're 100% right. And that's the thing about these type of books, right? Is that they're not always going to end up fitting perfectly because of a lot of stuff that happens. But I think that they did a pretty decent job with this story, and I think the author really did make it work in a very interesting way that made it more rewarding. Again, even just for where we were at the beginning. Of the story in the last book. It's like, okay, no, he really made this stuff make sense, and that's fantastic. So we had some interesting, I just kind of thought interesting losses, some big losses, and some gains in the story here. And one of the biggest ones is that we have two major characters ending up dying. And so you had Brant die, as well as Duvall die because of a booby trap set on the Enterprise, and they are not able to save them. And I was like, oh, wow, that's kind of a gutsy move, because they were quite integral characters to the story, and now they're just gone.
Yeah, it's, I think it was Dr. Trant, right? She it was kind of one of those things, like, I don't know how many goodbyes she and Trip were going to have, but that was one of those, I don't know, heartbreaking love stories, just because it was, the love, or whatever you want to call it, between the two of them, that it was almost like a forbidden kind of thing, but they also knew that it couldn't last because he had to go back to his own universe, and she was the one that discovered the sickness anyways from Hoshi and Trip, and became a real strong ally and advocate for Trip and the rest of really the Enterprise crew, and trying to find peace between the two warring factions.
Yes.
And so, that was that would have been a tough one, especially if we had it on screen over, a 2 or 3 episode arc, because she was really brought up. It's funny to say, like, that one of these secondary kind of original characters for the novels, dies, and it's like, I just wish from that we got to see more of Trip's reaction, because the book kind of finishes up fairly quickly after that, and we don't get. He pretty much has to go right back to work after it, and doesn't get much time with it, which would have been interesting to explore. And same thing with Duvall. Like, she was one, like you mentioned earlier, that we were questioning in the first book, when we thought maybe she was from the Prime universe, as to her intentions of turning sides, I guess, to go over to Sadir's side, and having his son, which, again, like you said, would turn out to be Archer's, and Archer really struggled with looking at her not as the person that he was in love with, or at least had a major crush on in his past, but also just, again, like, it happened so fast with her death. Like, she became, like, a sympathetic character very quickly when we found out that, okay, she's from this universe, but she's also, she did go to Sadir because she knew she was pregnant and that was going to be the only way to save her child, which we had kind of wondered about. And so, you know, for her to die and then to leave this kid alone, I mean, it was just this like kind of massive heartbreak all at once for, you know, a couple secondary characters that I think that Dave Stern did a really good job making us care about them in such a short period of time, you know, so that that their deaths actually meant something. Like we want other people's deaths to mean something to our main crew, like the main cast, I guess, of the crew that we're reading about, in this case, Enterprise. But the deaths, these two deaths with Trant and Duvall, like on their own, I felt like were sad enough that it almost didn't matter what our own crew felt about it, like because we, the reader, had kind of invested in these characters.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point with both of them on all sides. In the sense that, you know, with Brant, it was interesting because we don't get a lot of time for Trip to deal with the fallout, and then it's strange because, well, that's such an important part of the story for Trip, and then we just kind of like, oh yeah, Trip had this like a fling with a kind of married woman, and now she's dead, and you know, it just seemed very strange. And then, you know, because on top of that, you know, you had Ferric, who is getting back kind of his life, right? Like he wasn't going to be completely the same. He was never going to be completely the same because of all that had happened with him. But I don't know. I just, part of that just kind of like, we didn't really see the whole. Maybe this is just one of those things where it's like you would wish there was a book that kind of followed up with this in the novel continuity, where you got a chance to get a piece of what happened to Trip, like how he was feeling about this afterwards, because there isn't time in the book to deal with that. And then I think the same thing kind of with Duvall dying. You have the same thing with Archer, you know. Although for him, he's going to go back to his universe. She's dead in both universes for him, you know? And so I don't know. It was kind of a strange thing to be able to have. So there's a lot of stuff that kind of happens at the end of the book, and then we end, and then they're done, and then we'll never touch this again. And so it's not that it makes it a bad story, but it just like, yeah, there's a lot of fallout that I feel like we should have. It almost feels like there should be an epilogue chapter with them, especially those two, kind of dealing with the repercussions of those massive kind of emotional traumas that they've been through. It almost even just feels like it would be nice if there had been an epilogue with Trip and Archer going camping or something together to kind of deal with what they've been through. Yeah. You know? So.
Well, and this is kind of one of those situations, like this is a very long book compared to the first one. I want to say almost twice as long, it seemed like, anyway. And, you know, I know we were both kind of a little on the fence after the first book of like, okay, well, where's this going? You know, we only really had Trip to follow on anything. And this one was so jam-packed that I felt like they could have actually split it into two slightly smaller books, with one story being about either like finding the Enterprise, like, or, you know, bringing the crew back together to Enterprise, and the last book really being the kind of political intrigue with the boy Lehman, and the deaths of Trant and Duvall, you know, Ferric getting his mind back, all of those things. So there could be a little bit more breathing room on that story, because even the son, we see him grieving some, like he wants to be alone, but immediately has to jump into, okay, now I need to go save my people kind of thing. Right. And again, it just didn't, that part just never felt realistic with with Trip, Archer, and Lehman. I've had very few people, I've been lucky that very few people in my life have passed away. Like, a couple grandparents is, really it. And so I haven't had to deal with that, but I also know that it takes more than an hour or two to get over, something like that. And that's, when you can see it coming, when it happens instantaneously, like right in front of your eyes, it seems like people should, be struggling with this more. And, Trip and Archer are both Starfleet trained, so maybe they know how to compartmentalize it better. But, I think the kid would be beside himself with grief. Like, he had lost his dad, like who he thought was his dad, his father figure, whatever, a while back. And now his mom just suddenly died right in front of him. I mean, to go
and
do
he
what
finds
he did.
out like huge news, which is that he is not who he thought he was.
Exactly.
So, I mean, in the sense of like he's not part Denari. His dad isn't who he thought his dad was, really. And even though, I mean, in the end, for him, it doesn't change as much, just because, he'll never probably know Archer in this, universe, most likely. And so, I don't know. There seems, I like your idea of having this be a 3-part story. I think it actually would have worked better, and then you would have been able to do exactly what we were kind of talking about, which is the idea of like having a little bit more time at the end to be able to spend with the fallout of these characters, and even just spend a little bit more time with all of the characters for all the fallout that you get, and should have, with this. So
I'd like to see Trip and Ferric have a little bit more time together, even, and maybe him helping Ferric know who his wife was a little bit before she died. Absolutely. I mean, there's so many great story plot points here that you could do, and this was an interesting thing for me because, I mean, we talk about the idea of trying to create a lasting peace here, and these factions are coming together, slowly transforming in the end towards democracy. But the book, again, this is another place where, there's a precarious situation that they're in because Lehman is not Denari, and he's not even half Denari. So when the truth of that comes out and what's going to happen, and it does feel a little bit like the story takes the shortcut and makes it seem like everything's going to be okay, even when people find out. And it just, I don't know. I don't know if that really worked well for me personally, that it was such a shortcut. Because anytime you build some sort of political thing, or the foundation of your political society is a lie, that never seems like a good thing to me. Yeah. And you said it perfectly. I think they took a shortcut. The story took a shortcut. I mean, our crew did too, but basically just to end it and get to the ending that we needed to end the story. But you could kind of, they could even gone the shortcut route of somebody running up to the podium and going, Lehman's not even a Denari, he's a full-blooded human, and the people kind of just shrugging and going, so what? He was still Sadir's son, and he can still bring us peace, But like,
yeah, I like that.
I think realistically, what's going to happen is a lot of problems when, I mean, this is essentially just a cover up, and it will get exposed someday. They never remain covered forever. And I mean, this could be a problem for them in the future. And I guess we'll never know.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So what you're saying is that a lot of S is going to hit the fan.
Exactly.
Okay. That makes sense. So Well, I think the last big thing for me was getting home. And how do you feel about that? Because how do you feel about that?
Well, they got home. They just right away. It was a problem through that T'Pol was trying to solve this entire book, and it turned out she couldn't. And then Hoshi jumps in because she's all of a sudden part of the story in the last 15 pages or so, and is basically has, I guess, the Deus Ex Machina idea that gets them home. They needed sensor data, and she's like, well, I had turned on the sensors accidentally. I'm such a klutz in the Suliban cell ship that Trip and I took, and I think that's got all the information we need. Boom, we're home. And it just, I was bugged in the first book that she didn't have much to do, and I was really hoping that she was going to have something to do, because it was kind of one of those points where I was like, if you're not going to use a character, don't use the character. But don't take her and make her sick the entire first book, sick the entire second book, and go, oh, right, I forgot about Hoshi. We probably need to do something with her. And then make her the savior of everything that, that gets them home. I mean, they could have used her to such better effect throughout the stories, or not. Or again, she could have just, this could have been a red shirt character, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm just really bothered by how Hoshi was used in both of these books. I get that she wasn't one of the main characters, the quote unquote main characters from the series, but I mean, neither was Travis, and he even had some good stuff to do. I never liked how his treatment on the show, but he even had some good stuff in this book. But Hoshi, I just felt like this was such a disservice to her character that it would have been better if they'd have just forgotten that she was on the ship at all, or just had her off at some conference before they went through the anomaly in the first place. Because it just seemed like she was shoehorned in, and I just didn't feel good about it. It bugged me at the end when and actually it was what was there was one other thing that she said. Sorry, there was a quote here. Oh yeah, so there was a part too where Archer contacts her. She's in her quarters eating because she's lost a lot of weight, and the doctor wants to have her gain a couple more pounds to kind of get back to a healthy weight before she goes back on duty. Archer sees her eating a steak, and he's like, oh, I didn't know you ate steak. And she goes, well, this is kind of the doctor's order. So now the doctor's telling her she can't eat her normal diet that she likes. Now she's being forced to eat meat. So sorry, vegans and vegetarians. If the doctor tells you to, you have to eat meat. And then Archer goes, okay, well, we'll let you get back to eating. And that was the end, until she came back at the end. It was what was even the point of that? It almost felt like the author just didn't like Hoshi and was going to really stick it to her. Not only am I not going to use her, but when I do, I'm going to make her, eat the food that, she's chosen or unable to eat. I don't know.
I'm 100% with you. I just think the whole book, like you said, we talk about how nobody can figure out a way home, and then we have this idea of what we need and everything and how we can't get it. And then, it's just, we hit the easy button. And it was very frustrating, and it was disappointing because I felt like, the first book had set things up well. And then this book kind of squandered a lot of the opportunities I felt like were there, because there are great ideas, I think, in this story. And the whole story itself is a great idea. I just think the execution really fell flat for me in this second book, which is disappointing. And so as we come to the close, I'm really interested to see where you land with your ratings, Casey.
Well, rant aside about Hoshi, I really did like this one. I felt like there was a lot of big things that happened here. It was a great story idea, and I actually really, as I was going through it, I was really starting to think, wow, I think I might actually end up giving this one a 5. But especially towards when the end happened, that totally undid some of the good graces it had built up. So I landed on a 4 easy buttons out of 5, and I could push it up to 4.5, but as fast as the story moved and everything, I could see this as a 5. But I think this would have been so much better if it had been broken up into 2 books, or even, I mean, I already said it was a long book, but if it had been a longer book, to just spend a little bit more time with this and get rid of the easy button and do something else, I think it could have been much better. But yeah, I ended up with a 4. How about your rating?
I just find that absolutely fascinating because as we actually talked about the book, on Goodreads you'd see it as a 3, but to me this is actually probably a 2.5 out of 5. And part of that has to do with the ways in which I felt like too much of the story didn't live up to the promise. Again, there are parts of the story that I really enjoyed. Just the execution of them was lacking. And then there were some other frustrations. The writing never felt up to par of what I would expect. And so, yeah, I was disappointed because, I loved being back in Enterprise with that first book. And this one just didn't end up doing it for me with the way that it landed the Enterprise. So it just is kind of more of a crash and burn than a nice soft landing. So, but, I'm excited because we are continuing on then next time with more New Earth. So hopefully that series will continue more of an upward trend.
Well, we've been to alternate universes. We've been to mirror universes. We're going back to New Earth. There's so much more in store for us as we're actually working our way towards episode 350 here on Literary Tracks. It's very exciting. I don't feel like I've been on the show that long, but I've definitely been listening that long. So looking forward to that.
I am very excited, Casey. I mean, it's been crazy to be on this ride. The Literary Treks was the first podcast that I ever started on, and, that I was, a co-host on and everything. And so it's been an incredible ride as we get closer, like you said, to 350. But before we get there, if anybody does want to catch up with you, Casey, and just see what else you've got going on, or maybe they want to talk more Star Trek books with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Goodreads, Letterboxd, Twitter, and Instagram at Knitting Trekkie. I'm more of a lurker on Instagram and Twitter, but I'm fairly active-ish on Goodreads and Letterboxd. You can also find me on Facebook, again, lurking in the Babel Conference. And you can also find me on a podcast called Mickey's Marvels, where we talk about everything under the Disney umbrella. Although we are going to go rogue on this upcoming episode. We're going to talk about Star Wars Episode 3 in preparation for Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Nice. Very nice. Well, of course, you can find me all over social media under the name MattRushing02. Of course, here on the network with the 602 Club, which is our non-Star Trek side. We love the non-Star Trek side of the network because there's just so much to talk about. You can also find me, of course, here doing the Orb, Warp 5, Saddle Up, and The Artificial Tango. The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise. Chris and I are celebrating 20 years of Enterprise. We're walking through every single episode there. You've also got Saddle Up, which is about Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and The Artificial Tango, where we talked all about Star Trek Picard Season 2, and we got some things in the works maybe as well for that as we wait for Season 3. And of course, you can also find me over on the Nerd Party Network. One show I did there that's completed now is Owl Post. I did that with Drea Kaufman. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And last but not least, doing aggressive negotiations with John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But we want to say thank you, of course, so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
You call that light reading? To each his own, number one.